Welcome to my channel. This is Bruce the Boss, and this is actually going to be a response to a response video of mine that I did on the downfall of the amazing Lucas, which if you haven't already seen that, go ahead and check that video out. Apparently my video showed up on the feed of a fellow YouTuber by the name of Castle Kingsize, who I like to refer to as the blue tongue, old, scary, freaky looking Rikishi Fatu wannabe. Who had some comments to say about my video, and I was like, I'm very excited. I loved it, by the way. It was very entertaining, very interesting. And so, he asked, like, hey, check it out. I gotta say, I listened to all 14 minutes. It was cool. I'll be more than glad to put the link to that video in the description box a little later if anyone else wants to check it out. So essentially my video was, and I did this back in June on my previous channel before it got deleted, which, as you all know, was because I went against the singular narrative of the whole pandemic and the Modella virus that's going around. Not that everything being said are lies or misinformation, since we're not being told a lot of things, and there's a lot of conversation not allowed being had that I allowed on my channel, and it eventually got it nuked. But I digress. When I resurrected myself on this new channel here, I basically said, my maiden video is going to be the amazing Lucas. I figured, let me just redo that one again. I literally did it 2 weeks prior to my old channel being nuked, and it just blew up. Why? Because it resonated with a lot of people. In fact, right now, it is my most watched video currently. It wasn't on my previous channel, not by a long shot, because of how successful my previous channel was becoming. But now that I'm starting over, that video seems to really be resonating with a lot. And so he had a response to it. He's very animated too. I don't know. So if you don't check it out, here's a clip.
I'm here, Bruce. What's up, Bruce? Bruce from the ashes. One came from the ashes. Bruce. I just got through watching your video, buddy. I was watching your video, the one where you described the fall, the decline of the amazing Lucas.
So, by the way, I was not that emotional about the response. Oh my God, he's attacking Officer Tatum. If you watched the video, probably misunderstood what I was saying, or didn't really understand. Attacking Officer Brandon Tatum is not the reason for Lucas's downfall, which it was a downfall. At the time I made the video back in mid-June originally, Lucas was still over 400,000 subscribers, but I remember first being introduced to the amazing Lucas about 2 years ago, and he was well on his way to about 500,000, if not already there. And at that time, you're talking about over 90,000 sub drop in a very, very short period of time. And even to this day, October the 18th, 2021, since I made that video just a couple of months ago, his subscriber base dropped another almost 20,000 subs. He's well under 400,000 now. And so there's a reason for that. The attacks on Brandon Tatum was nothing but a symptom of the actual issue. The issue is him grifting. After spending a couple of years during the Trump administration, I guess you can say tap dancing to the right and or conservatives, because they were the people assumingly in charge at that time and or in power. The moment things started to shift in 2020 is when you notice the grift to the left or center left. And attacking Brandon Tatum was just his way of signaling to who he hoped would be his new audience base, and that is, again, those who swing center left and or left, by vitriolically attacking those on the right, burning bridges. It's not about having a different opinion, because I would always go back to other great YouTubers and or should I say great YouTube communities, whether it be Young Ripper, aka Eric July, Liberty Doll, Kim Iverson. These are all YouTubers who are still to this day massively growing, and to a lot of extent outpacing Lucas during that same time period, despite the fact that their community does not agree with those YouTubers 100% on a lot of issues. But the reason why and they come from all sorts or parts of the political spectrum. But the reason why they keep supporting and they're going back to that YouTuber, liking the videos, sharing the videos, commenting, interacting is even though they may not always agree with each other on a lot of things. Eric July will call out conservatives, Republicans all the time. Kim Iverson will have positions that are very much socialist as it pertains to universal health care and or free college education and canceling current college debt. And that would go against many libertarians that follow her and or many conservatives that do follow her. And I'm pretty certain a lot of independents don't really care for that as much. But she continues to attract those people on all sides, much like Eric July, Liberty Doll, is because they are respectful about it. You can agree to disagree. They will present their information, their facts, but they won't try to clown you and or ridicule you or make you feel less of a person for having a difference of opinion. And that's for a more healthy conversation, more healthy community in the area where you can agree to disagree on certain things without putting the other person down personally. And that's where Lucas is losing at. He's literally trying to burn those bridges with conservatives, which I don't think they would care if he had a different opinion on things like Black Lives Matter and or election, things like that. But for him to take it personal and literally attack Officer Tatum for petty things, it's like it's beneath you. And so a lot of people don't like that. They feel betrayed. And so they left in great swarms. He's been hemorrhaging subscribers ever since, and he's never been able to gain a new audience of those on the liberal left. It's just been nothing but steady free fall. So that's all. But it is accurate to say that he is, again, declining in viewership and or declining in relevancy. That's all. There was an open invitation to debate scripture. I'm all for that. I'm down. So whoever gets to 1,000 first, likely, probably you now. I was definitely practically there on my previous channel. So but we'll see. I appreciate everyone's support though thus far in helping me regain a lot of that membership in a very short period of time, considering I was already small still and very much new. So we'll see where that goes. Now, on the next thing he talked about, so taxation, here's my default position. Taxation is theft. He talked about paying your fair share, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I have somewhat of a more anarchist libertarian position when it comes to taxation, and like I said, taxation is theft. You don't pay taxes, they take taxes out of your paycheck. FICA, Medicare, the Social Security tax, income tax. While I was living in Philly, working at the company I currently work for still to this day after 11 and a half years, it was like they would tax me on my income on the township level. They would tax me on my income on the city level of Philly. They would tax me on the state level of Pennsylvania on top of the federal income tax. It's like, dude. And that's why I wound up relocating here to Texas, because at least I get to keep most of, that's $200 back in my paycheck that I earn that Texas doesn't need to take out of my income. And I was like, where was the money going? Where were all of these taxes that you are, for whatever reason, taken? Where's it going? The neighborhoods still look like crap. The roads are crappy, pothole infested. The schools are falling apart. In fact, heck, you can make the argument that they're not really learning crap anyway in a lot of these schools. Where's the money really going? In a lot of cases, that's, if not to these crony capitalists and or for these war and other investments and or programs that they want to do. So, however, you talk about paying your fair share, that's another argument in and of itself that's actually a faulty one, because pay your fair share indicates that you're not contributing equally, when that's actually not the case. The top 20% in this country pay or contribute to over 80% of the tax revenue. Trillions of dollars in revenue. They're not getting it from people like us or people in the hood. They're getting it from people in Beverly Hills, Wall Street, downtown Miami, the South Beach, etc. Those making over $200,000, $400,000 a year easily, and upwards. They make, again, that's the undisputed fact that the top 20% contribute and or contribute to over 80% of the tax revenue. That's more than their fair share. Fair share would be everyone contributing an equal percentage. So the top 20% contributing, 20% of the tax revenue, basically. That would be fair share. But, they're overcompensating, if anything else. So this idea that, what do you want? The top 20% to pay 90%, 95% of all taxes? I mean, that's the only logical conclusion. They make one big mistake when it comes to this whole fair share argument, and that is the tax rate. That is correct. The tax rate is not the same often, especially because of fancy accounting work that they can do. And who wouldn't do that, really? Honestly, if you can afford an accountant who can find ways of saving you the money that you yourself earned, who wouldn't take that advantage? But let's say while the average person pays 32% of their income, 35% of their income towards taxes, and the richest 10%, whatever the case may be, get away with only paying 10% of their income. That's a big percentage difference of one's income, yes. But then when you take 10% of, let's say, the top 10% earners in this country, let's say those who are making millions of dollars, 10% of $1 million is $100,000, dog. And that $100,000 in taxes is more than what the average family in the United States make in gross income for the whole year. The average family, last I recall, made roughly around, give or take, the average family in the United States made around like $52,000 a year gross income. So most average people don't even make half of what the richest 10%, richest 1% pay in taxes, because that percentage, even though it's a lower percentage, accounts for so much more money than the average individual will ever see in a year. So, fair share. So what's 30% of, let's say, 50,000? We're talking about roughly about $15,000 in taxes. Comparing 15,000 average individual putting on the table compared to this rich person putting in 100,000, it's not even close. Again, they're putting in more to the pie. So it's a non sequitur to talk about fair share when they're the one pulling a cart. They're pulling most of the weight in terms of taxes. You can't dispute that.
By birth. We've got the wiggles, man. We're born with the wiggles.
You're wiggly? What does that mean? You're a little funny?
What does that mean? You're a little funny?
Do you see me?
You can't see me. Man, you're so large, the Mars rover could see you, dude. So I don't...
Hard to beat Samoans. Do you know what I'm talking about? With the wiggles. That's why you can't beat us. It's hard to beat Samoans.
Samoas are hard to beat? Means you get beat a lot then, apparently. But I'm trying to think, when was the last thing that the Samoan Islands has ever won or dominated in? When was the last war that they ever won? When was the last athletic competition that they were dominant in? It's not football. It's not basketball. It's not boxing. Or the UFC, if I'm not mistaken. I don't follow baseball. I don't follow hockey. So I can't speak to that. It's not track and field. So, all right, hard to beat. But apparently y'all get beat a lot. Because y'all don't dominate in crap. Just saying. I will agree with you on this one point when it comes to the drug war. Because when it comes to the drug war, I think it's been a war on poor and minority people. You can look at the history of the reason for the illegalization of certain drugs like marijuana. That was all about criminalizing a popular recreational drug that many people were using, but by and large, minorities, blacks and or Mexicans were using. If you think immigration is a problem now, just imagine how it was a little over 115 years ago. Back before you had this level of technology and the ability to monitor the border. Mexican immigrants were coming across the border in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California like crazy. One way of discouraging that was to criminalize one of their popular activities, especially since the law made it really hard for minorities to purchase legally tobacco. So they found the next available thing. And just imagine how Amslinger was when he was tasked with the prospect of criminalizing a weed that can grow almost any and everywhere so easily. But the reason was mostly because of racism. Same thing with cocaine. It was a South Carolina senator back in 1914 whose argument for criminalizing cocaine was that it made the Negro incredibly strong, gave him the strength of 10 men, made him crazy, hard to kill with bullets, and would encourage him to rape white women. You can look that up. That's a fact. That's the history behind it, despite the fact that cocaine at the time was legal and very well used. What do you think the name Coca-Cola comes from? One of the primary ingredients was cocaine. Who was it? Or no, Sigmund Freud, famed psychologist, known to use it. It was heavily prescribed. It was legal, but there was racism behind the push to make it criminalized. So we can talk about that, how it's been focused on people of color, despite the fact that Caucasians and or people of color use drugs at roughly the same rate. And there need to be pushes to decriminalize it. I'm all for that. However, if you think that's the only reason behind most police interactions in the inner city, that's a very ignorant statement to make. Because truth of the matter is, in a lot of these inner city communities, it's a war zone. And that's not a racist statement to make. That's just a matter of fact. It's not just me making that statement. A lot of other people, like legendary GOAT Tupac, has also said, listen.
We are living in a war zone. It's not as easy as these people are making us think, that they just got some criminal ass black kids with guns. It is not like that. We live in hell. We live in the gutter. We got us stacked up 80 deep in one building. By the time you get out your house, you strapped to protect yourself. Because you living in the same community that the police is carrying rifles and riot gear. They need them riot, excuse my language, I'm so sorry. The same reasons they need the riot hat, the riot jacket, the flak jacket, the double vest, the 9mm Glocks with extra bullets, the tear gas, the mace, all that. Who do you think the police is using that against? Dogs? So we fighting the same villains that they fight in the street. But instead of them seeing us fighting villains in the street, we all villains.
It's today is Sunday, October the 17th that I'm recording this video. All we have to do is wait like 15, 20 hours from now and just listen to look at the report on how many people get shot up in Chicago this weekend. I'm gonna guess ballpark figure, especially with the potential walkout of cops over the vax mandate. I'll say anywhere from 35 lowball to as much as 80 people will get shot in Chicago. And then as far as deaths, anywhere between 4 and 8 people will get killed. That's my guesstimate, and we'll see, how accurate that is by the time I do post this video. And I can guarantee, at worst, one of those shootings would be from a cop trying to stop an illegal activity. The 99.99% of all of those other shootings and or homicides will be the result of gangbanging and or random acts of violence, because it's a war zone. The reason why Chicago is referred to as Chirac is simply because more people at any given time get shot in Chicago on any given week than Iraq during the height of the war. You're talking about Chicago reaching 700 homicides. My former hometown, where I was born and raised in Philly, also known as Philadelphia, is vastly approaching over 400 homicides this year. Thousands upon thousands of people getting shot every single year. And most of these cases going unsolved, by the way. It's not safe anymore in a lot of these cities. Whether you're talking about Detroit, Chicago, Philly, Camden, or Trenton, New Jersey, Baltimore, Oakland, Los Angeles, Seattle, it's getting pretty, not as safe anymore. It's a war zone that a lot of these cops are fighting in. It's not an excuse for actual police brutality, but a lot of the cases of police brutality and the reason why they're coming into these ghettos and their areas has nothing to do with racism and or drug paraphernalia and or just simple drug possession, and more to do with them responding to actual crimes, actual gang activity, etc. So, got to wise up on the inner city situation.
Sharing Have you heard of this word? Share.
Oh. Have I heard of the word sharing? Of course I heard of the word sharing. Just like I'm pretty certain you have, based upon a lot of your sides. Like, yo, dog, share that pie or share that cake. I'll finish it all for you. But there's nothing sharing about. That's all a voluntary interaction between the parties involved. When you are sharing a piece of pie, sharing your pencil, sharing money, that's a voluntary interaction between the sharer, the lender, and the lendee. There's nothing voluntary about socialism and or communism when enforced by the government, because there's nothing voluntary about any of those interactions. It's all forced. Now, I have nothing against a community actually deciding to get together and say, we're going to do for self. Have you ever heard of the Black Panthers? Huey P. Newton, Fred Hammond. This was a group in the late 60s and throughout the 70s that voluntarily got together. When the government was failing them, they said, you know what, screw the government. We're going to do for self. We're going to create our own medical centers and provide free health care to the people in the community. We're going to create our own food program and provide food for the people in the community, particularly the children, and feed them. We don't need the government. Look at what the Amish are doing to this day, every day. When average people can get together and take care of themselves, take care of the people in the community, that's an amazing thing. That's a voluntary action, and you get more from that, not from the government taking. Jesus did not say, speaking of debating scripture, Jesus never said, I want the government, give your money to Rome and let Rome feed the hungry and take care of the least. He said it is your responsibility as an individual to care for the least in this society, and everything you do for the least, you do for me. It had nothing to do with, I'm just going to abdicate my responsibility as a human being and ignore that homeless person I see begging for food, shelter, on the side of the road or under the underpass. Or I see this family struggling, I'm not going to help them out every now and then. I see this kid bumming for food outside the supermarket, and I'm not going to help him make get a little something. It was always about you, the average individual, getting together as a group and as a community, not the government forcing you. And that's not to praise and or say capitalism is the only way, because honestly, what we have going on in this country right now is not pure capitalism. It's a fixed system. There's a lot of crony capitalism going on. And it can't even be properly regulated, because these government officials that are supposed to be regulating the system are actually funded and paid and put in their positions of power in politics by these corporations. They wouldn't be in their position if they weren't getting tens of thousands of dollars every day while they're campaign in office. You wouldn't hear about them. They depend on these corporations to pay their bills. And so they're not going to do anything that goes against the interests of a lot of these big corporations. And so the current system is also flawed, but I will have to admit, it's better than the alternative at the same time, but there's a lot to be desired. What else? Went on about Donald Trump voters. I didn't vote for Donald Trump, even on my last channel when I was talking about the election and everything leading up to it. I never endorsed Donald Trump, never said I wanted him to win, although in retrospect, I wish he did, because millions of people wouldn't be at risk of losing their jobs over a vax mandate. And or being coerced and forced into a situation that they otherwise didn't want to do. But I never voted for Trump, never endorsed him to win, just saying. So I don't know why he went off on a tangent for about 3 minutes talking about why people would vote for Trump in what was supposed to be a response video to me. I never said I voted for Trump. So I don't know if that was a false assumption, or he just, while on this idea, went on a tangent about Trump voters just in general, had nothing to do with me. If so, that's cool. Although he talks about judging people by what they say, watch what they say.
You guys are so lost. Listen to a man. You can hear him. You can hear what he's about. Listen to a man. Listen to what they're saying.
So I can already see you possibly losing the scripture debate, because the scripture clearly says you judge a tree by its fruit. It has nothing to do with what a person says. A person could say a lot of things. You judge them by the fruits that they bear, their actions. What do they do? So you can point to a lot, not that I'm defending, and this is not a defense of Trump. What I'm saying, why didn't you also talk about Biden voters and their racism, for instance, if you're going to be fair about it? Because for one, going back to the topic of judging them by their actions, Trump said a lot of things, but can you point to any particular legislation that led to the mass incarceration, a topic you mentioned earlier, of people of color and black people? Because I can point to Joe Biden back in the mid 90s talking and pushing as the architect of the 94 crime bill, talking about us as predators and how he needed to get us off of the streets to protect him and his family and Madam President and the people of her ilk.
Back to the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because we should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people.
That's what he said. And after the passage of the crime bill, in 1995, on any given day, 1 out of 128 adults were incarcerated, while 1 out of 17 black adult males was incarcerated on any given day. You see this disparity? They knew who they were targeting with that crime bill law, and it worked. Talk about another crime bill that Joe Biden authored or actually did in 1987, mandatory sentencing. So it was well known at that time in the 80s, especially during the crack epidemic, that 90% of all crack arrests were of blacks, while 75 to 80% of all powder cocaine arrests were of whites. Based upon that mandatory sentencing bill that Joe Biden pushed in 1987, helped design and sign into law, 5 grams of crack cocaine triggered a mandatory 5-year prison sentence, while it took 500 grams of powder cocaine, 100 times as much, to trigger the same sentence for a white boy. And as a result, you saw mass incarceration over the course of the decades of young black males. Again, these were laws that were done by Joe Biden. Although, and when you look at the actions of a lot of these politicians in our communities, in our inner city, you see a lot of desolation, hopelessness, crime, low employment, high unemployment of people of color, neighborhoods and their whole communities being broken down and or destroyed, looking like they've been through war zones. And these are the cities also where you see high levels of police brutality. Let's not also forget, for instance, thinking about George Floyd and the officer Derek Chauvin, it was Democratic presidential hopeful, and she was actually a high contender, Amy Klobuchar, who was acting attorney general at one point just like 8 years ago in the city of Minneapolis, and a case against Officer Derek Chauvin was brought to her and she just tossed it. And looking at that city of Minneapolis, all run by Democrats. And you look at the results of police brutality in cities like that. Democratic mayor, Democratic city council, all but one of the 13 city council members in Minneapolis were Democrats, the other person Green Party. So you look at the actions, I don't see anything favorable from any party either. And going back to what they say, then you listen to what they say. Apparently, we're not black if we don't vote for you. Apparently, we all think alike. Interesting.
And by the way, what you all know, but most people don't know, unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community with incredibly different attitudes about different things. You go to Florida, you find a very different attitude about immigration in certain places than you do when you're in Arizona. So it's a very different, a very diverse community.
And apparently we don't know how to use the internet in order to make an appointment.
A lot of people don't know how to register. Not everybody in the community, in the Hispanic and the African American community, particularly in rural areas that are distant and or inner city districts, know how to get online to determine how to get in line for that COVID vaccination at the Walgreens or at the...
And even worse, for the longest they were making the argument that somehow we don't know how to get an ID. That somehow getting an ID is such a trouble and a burden for people of color that any other person can get, despite the fact that you need a form of ID in order to get a house, open up a loan or get a mortgage, travel, get on a plane. Apparently black people don't get on planes anymore when we travel if we can't produce ID. Go figure. Can't buy alcohol, can't go to a rated R movie. There are so many different things you need ID for just everyday things that apparently is a hardship for people of color, despite the fact that we do have access to identification, whether it be a state ID, driver's license. So that's the response. All right, so that's my response video. I thought it was very entertaining, very interesting. Again, I loved it. It was cool. Keep them coming. Again, let me know what you think of this video. Like this video, comment on this video, share this video. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Appreciate everyone's support. This is Bruce the Boss, and I'm out. Peace.